I really want Derek's opinion on this as he covers the league as well. But RB Leipzig hosting Manchester City. It's not really the game that we're here to talk about, although, of course, it's important because they want Europa League. But it's really about Jesse Marsch and the fact that he is no longer the club's manager. We've discussed this a lot, obviously, this week. And as I mentioned, I would love Derek's opinion on this. But when you look at the table, when you look at the restructuring of the squad in the summer, it's not to say that it's all completely Jesse Marsch's undoing, though obviously he is the one that the fingers point at. What say you about Jesse Marsch saying goodbye to the club?
Not a huge surprise, but obviously not what we wanted, this early in the season. From the outside looking in, it always felt like this season was going to be more difficult than some people around Leipzig were making out. It was almost like the club were ignoring the fact that they'd lost so many key figures to Bayern Munich over the summer. It was always going to be very difficult to move on after you lose, such a charismatic coach as Julian Nagelsmann, but also, such a defensive stalwart as Dayot Upamecano, and then somebody who's as talismanic as Marcel Sabitzer. Taking those three out of the equation immediately, that made life a lot more difficult for Leipzig coming into this season. I also feel very, very sorry for Marsch in a way, because when I saw Leipzig come to Paris, they put in a very, very good performance, didn't deserve the way that the match went late on against them. They were the better side for the majority of that encounter. And they were also quite unlucky that they didn't capitalize on a brighter start against PSG in Germany. Had they taken more from those games, they could well have salvaged the Europa League spot ahead of time. And Jesse Marsch may well still be in a job. So, there's obviously the situation domestically has been a bit more concerning for the Leipzig hierarchy. But, I guess the other thing that really surprises me is, given that we've been debating the possibility of this happening for a while, that they haven't moved to immediately bring somebody else in, whether that's because they're waiting for someone like Jaissle of Salzburg to be done with their Champions League campaign, because obviously he can send a Red Bull team into the latter stages, depending on the way these midweek fixtures go, or that they're targeting somebody else completely who might be outside of the Red Bull network at this moment in time. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more of what Derek has to say to sort of add that necessary context to it.
Yeah, where do we start with this one? Let's start in the summer. And I did note at the time that when Jesse Marsch got the job, he was given a 2-year contract. So not a long contract. So I think we all said, and I believe I said on Twitter at the time, just remember that. It's a 2-year contract. So he was, if you like, on probation. They believed in him. They certainly saw him as somebody who'd come through their own clubs, their own RB clubs, and they saw some potential. But I don't think they were 100% convinced. And let's face it, it's a big step up from being the coach of the champions of Austria, when you're very well resourced in comparison with the others, to then going to a top Bundesliga club. And contrary to what a lot of people think, you don't just breeze into the Champions League. There is work to do. Outside of Bayern, every other game in the Bundesliga, was put to me the other day, is a bit like a knife fight. It's really an unpredictable league, and teams near the bottom beat teams near the top all the time. So you've rightly mentioned, Jonathan, the personnel situation. I think that there's a bit of revisionism that has gone on in the last few weeks. People have said to me, from all over the world, it was never going to be a good season for them. It was always going to be a struggle. I don't really accept that. I can accept that, yes, it was going to be more difficult. You've lost those players that you mentioned, Upamecano for certain, Konate, who hardly played really for 2 years. You got to say that. Sabitzer was there at the start when the results weren't great the first few weeks, and then he left, and that compounded things. And you've lost Nagelsmann. You've lost one of the best coaches in the world. So, big shoes to fill, big job for Jesse Marsch. But the expectation was certainly not 11th place in the Bundesliga at this stage of the season, with more defeats than wins. Should they be below Bochum, the team that got promoted from the second division last season? Should they be below Köln, who we spoke about earlier? Realistically, not. Now, here's the one thing I do find interesting. I listened yesterday to Oliver Mintzlaff, who's the CEO of RB Leipzig, talking on Sport 1. He gave a fairly long interview explaining the reasons for the departure of Jesse Marsch now. And he stressed that it was mutual, that Jesse Marsch, in his words, came to him or to them twice after match day 7 and 10 and expressed doubts as to whether he was the right person for the job, as to whether he was the right fit at this particular time. And Mintzlaff made the point, and we've all seen it, that Leipzig have evolved. They've gone from being this power team, this pressing, gegenpressing, if you like, team, to being much better in possession, a bit slower under Julian Nagelsmann. But the idea of bringing in Jesse Marsch was to reinstate the core RB values, to go back to the power game, if you like. And it seemed that some players just weren't on board with that. Mintzlaff said, yeah, the players have to look at themselves as well, because they didn't implement the match plans that were put forward. Now, it's been widely reported that Holger Schmidt of PSV in the Netherlands has been the main target of Leipzig to be the next coach. But it's also been reported today that Schmidt has no interest in terminating his contract, which runs until 2022. Now, Schmidt is, if anything, an even more extreme power gegenpressing football advocate. So if the argument is that Jesse Marsch wasn't the right fit, why would you be going for somebody else who's in that mold? So to me, something doesn't quite add up with that reasoning. But I think the bottom line is the results weren't good enough. There was underperformance. He was a breath of fresh air in terms of his personality. I think people liked him, even though they may not love Leipzig, and most people in Germany certainly don't love Leipzig for a variety of reasons. And I think we can only hope that that he'll be back in some capacity as a football coach somewhere.
I've got one question to kind of follow up with, and I know it's not going to go down particularly well with the Bundesliga crowd, but is this a major blow for the Red Bull empire, losing a coach who's come through the ranks and was expected to sort of lead Leipzig on to take that next step? Because from the outside looking in, once again, it is a club now that seems to be quite a stepping stone club for its biggest players. We're looking at the likes of Christopher Nkunku having a superb season, and I'm delighted to see him doing so well outside of Paris. But again, somebody who may well find himself on the move, probably not in January, but next summer.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has always been the debate with RB Leipzig. What are they? What do they want to be? They've been quite consistent in terms of those core values. They've been about signing players at a young age, making them RB players, building up their values, and then selling them on for the most part. There have been exceptions, people like Forsberg and people like Paulsen and Zabitzer, you could certainly say, until he left for Bayern. But this is the dilemma now. Where do they go from here? And, for example, if you look at coaches, could a coach from the outside come in and do a job for this club? Because so far, you mentioned stepping stones. It's been, yes, a stepping stone situation for players, but also for coaches. So does that mean that the logical next step is you look at Matthias Jessle in Salzburg? Do you look at maybe Bo Svensson at Mainz, who has a background with RB, who's done really well with Mainz? Or do you sort of go in with an open mind and say, no, we've moved beyond this? With Nagelsmann, we had somebody who wasn't an RB guy, maybe some crossover in terms of his values and beliefs, but he made them more of a possession team. Did he make them a better team? Yes, he did. So I think all these things have to be discussed. I do agree that some people will ask the question, why do you get rid of a coach when you don't have an obvious replacement? I think the answer is that they just felt that the situation had got out of hand and there were doubts on both sides. But I think also they are waiting to find out, who might be available between now and Christmas. We've only got three, counting them in my head, we've got 3 match days until the winter break, and that's usually when somebody else gets brought in. So it buys Leipzig a bit of time to assess whether or not there's somebody available. Maybe somebody gets sacked. I mean, Adi Hütter, for example, in Mönchengladbach, after a 6-0 home defeat against Freiburg, is under pressure. Max Eberl has said no. He's our guy, and we'll walk this path together. But suppose somebody like that became available, somebody else who again has, guess what, an RB background. So yeah, they're an interesting club. As I said, that they're not everybody's favorites, but from a football point of view and from a sort of a football developmental building point of view, that they're fascinating.
Something else that fascinates me, and I'll try and make this as quick as possible, is the possibility that we might see Red Bull now do something that we've seen them do in Formula One in the past, where they potentially bring somebody up from what's essentially a feeder club in Salzburg. Is there a possibility that we see Jesse Marsch go back to Salzburg? Because I noticed in the press release, he hinted that he's still actually part of the Red Bull group.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, but I suppose it is possible because he certainly was very well liked there and did a great job. But again, if you're thinking about stepping stones, what would be the point of that from the overall RB point of view? Would it make sense to have somebody there who's probably not going to ascend to the Leipzig job again? I don't know. It's certainly one to watch. I don't think we've heard the last of Jesse Marsch, but whether that's in Europe or whether that's back in the USA, I'm not sure.